JinJa Birkenbeuel.
And I'm Esther Ikoro, and we're the hosts of the Honest Field Guide podcast.
Entrepreneurship is no joke. The journey is full of anticipation, failure, hope, and disappointment. You'll make money and be totally broke at the same time.
The Honest Field Guide podcast tells you the truth.
We know being an entrepreneur is crazy hard, and you will sometimes cry at dinner. Listen in to be inspired, laugh, and learn how to really thrive on your business journey.
Today on the Honest Field Guide podcast,
So this just happened.
the art of the pivot.
Perfect, Esther. The pivot. I can't rap, but I'm trying.
No, you can't. So,
I love the pivot because entrepreneurs, small business owners, mid-market business owners, global brands, all have had a moment in their lives, in their trajectory, where they've had to pivot.
Yeah.
Something has triggered it, and they're like, so this just happened.
and where do we go from here?
Exactly.
And how does this change things moving forward?
And pivoting is an exciting conversation because you can pivot because something horrible happened, or you can pivot because an opportunity happened and you're like, wow, I didn't even know that was there. And now that I know this, I got a new thing and I'm going to change.
Yeah, key insights happen.
Yeah.
And you recognize it and take advantage of them. So when it comes to pivoting, JinJa, I think pivoting is especially difficult because of the nature of entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurs are self-starters. Oftentimes we're some of the only entrepreneurs that we know. And so we have to be really driven. Like, we have to push ourselves. And in propelling yourself down this path of entrepreneurship, it might be hard to pump the brakes and say, wait a minute, maybe I should change course, because you're so wrapped up in your own rah, nothing's going to stop me now momentum. You know what I mean?
Ain't no stopping us now.
Or ain't no mountain high enough.
Ain't no mountain high enough. That's actually, You know what? Yeah. Those are two really good songs to think about of this conversation.
And sometimes there's a sign on the mountain that says, you're going the wrong way.
I love pivoting because we're sitting here right now in this not soundproof booth at Google. I had a moment in my company, Birk Creative, where I was presented with an opportunity that was very unique and very different by one of my clients, which is Google. And we talked about, working on a program that would not only help my company get more visibility, but it would require a lot more of me physically to do the work. And this is not something that was specifically in a competency or vertical of my company. And I remember sitting in my old office, looking around and saying, you know what? I'm not sure exactly where this is going to take me. I don't know if it's going to work, but I know that there's something happening here that is signaling to me that there's a change and I need to seize the day and go for it. And I decided to say yes to this opportunity. And now I am working with Google as a Google digital coach, which is providing information and insights and training and professional development to entrepreneurs and small businesses and mid-market and large businesses, in fact, on how to use different types of tools to help their businesses grow. It was an exciting moment because I was actually terrified. I thought, you know what? What if this kills my company? The requirement for me to be in a multitude of places at multiple times, I wasn't sure if that was going to work. But what happened is, it's just one of those unintended consequences. An unintended positive consequence is I was able to create and develop an entirely new line of business that I'd never had any vision around at all. Never for a million years did I open my brand strategy company, in which the purpose of my company is to look for gaps and find blind spots for companies to help them get to the outcomes they're seeking. I never thought I would be opening up a line of business around professional development and training and coaching and teaching people and businesses. So, when you talk about the art of the pivot, that was, in my opinion, with what I did, it was a brave act, and it was very different, very unusual, scary, and I jumped off the cliff, and I haven't looked back. And now I'm going down a rabbit hole, which has opened up even more opportunities and more lines of sight for my business that I really didn't think about. Because, you know, when you're an entrepreneur and you're in business, your nose is to the grindstone. You are trying to kill it every day, and you're asking yourself, hashtag winning yet? You know what I mean?
Hashtag winning yet.
Yeah.
Are we winning yet?
Are we winning yet? So I feel like, pivoting can be an amazingly beautiful thing. And it was for me because it was a positive opportunity and positive pivot. It wasn't, something horrible that happened that made me say, oops. But it was still so this just happened, and thank goodness. And I haven't looked back.
So is that a pivot or is that just expansion?
For me, that's a great question, because I guess you can look at it both ways. But the reason it was a pivot for me is that I actually shut the door on some other things.
I see. Yeah.
First of all, I shut the door on my very own private office, decided not to renew my lease, and I closed the door and I turned the keys over, and I made a decision that, I guess I'm not going to be 100% autonomous anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm going to attach myself in a very different way, to a client. Yeah. So, and also I never wanted to be a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher. My mother was a teacher in the Chicago public schools.
We become our parents.
I know. And I'm thinking to myself, my mom, did not want me to be a teacher. She said, I don't want you to be in the classroom. And I said, okay, I won't do it. But look at me.
And walked right into a classroom.
And I walked right into a quote unquote classroom. It's a little different than my mom's experience. Yeah. I'm not working with young children and families, things like that. But, so I was running away from something. I didn't want to do something. So for me, it was a flipping around. It's also an expansion, because once I pivoted, I saw opportunity for expansion. Mm-hmm. So it transitioned to expansion, or it transformed to expansion.
When we think about pivoting a lot, we think about money and maybe sales not working in the direction that we want to. But your point in your story brings up just an interesting scenario, because it wasn't necessarily about money per se, but about opportunity and expansion, deciding where to direct your attention. Well, let's talk about some of the things that bring up the idea of pivoting to a business. Of course, the most obvious thing is low sales, right? So maybe there's a business that thinks that it has a product that fits with the market, and it's just not converting into profit for that business. So that's one thing. There's also a business that once had product market fit, but that product market fit is no longer there. Like smartphones come out and your PDA is no longer relevant anymore. So although PDAs and pagers and things like that were great for business people, the emergence of new technology, shifting landscapes, changing culture, changing trends takes your product out of relevance and out of use for who you thought your target audience was. The other thing that brings up the pivot is that you see the audience begin to use your product in a way that you never thought before, and you begin to see growth in weird aspects of your business that you didn't consider you would see growth in. So a good example is Rent the Runway.
Rent the Runway is a great example of a pivot, because this is a company that started off trying to figure out, how do we get beautiful designer clothes for women that don't want to pay for these dresses and have them forever, but they can rent them for a little while and then return them, right? I mean, this is a great idea. Really amazing dresses, shoes, whatever you need that you can rent on a subscription service. Get a box of great, amazing clothes and then wear them and then turn them back around, right? That's the original concept. It's simple, easy, fast, efficient, the Amazon of clothes renting. But here's the thing. They are now considered the Navy SEAL of stains, a la dry cleaner. They are a dry cleaner. They make so much money on dry cleaning that they have a whole new line of business that they originally didn't anticipate. And so think about pivoting in this way. This is a company that was 100% thinking about fashion solutions. to start a company and have success, and it's based on this vision of beautiful dresses with beautiful women, and to realize at the end of the day that your money that's being generated is coming from dry cleaning. I mean, that's a company that had to, by the sheer force of the equipment they needed to make sure they could clean the clothes. You know how much money that would take? The capital, the staffing, the insurance, the chemicals or the green chemicals they're using, the workman's compensation. I mean, these are all things that had nothing to do with fashion. So that's a situation where, we are now a dry cleaners. So we have to have another business model to accommodate this new line of business that we're in. And oh my goodness, this is actually making more money potentially than us renting our dresses. And you know, you're also dealing with the concept of, I had a dream and it was a beautiful dream, and now I'm really just basically a dry cleaner. How do you handle that kind of a pivot? But even still, that's an example of a pivot. And so what happens sometimes when you're starting a business, or when you're in a business, or you're launching, or you even are in a business for a few years, and you realize, like, goodness gracious, I have a whole new line of business that not only did I probably not want, but I'm killing it.
Yeah.
I'm killing it.
Yeah.
You know, and you're grappling with having to pivot, but also maybe doing something you don't really want to do. So you got to figure out how to make these things work when it's not what you planned. I mean, being an entrepreneur and having a business, a lot of things happen that you don't plan. Mm-hmm. And this was actually a successful unplanned consequence for them, but it may not have been the place of their heart that they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But I wonder what it must have been like during their growth to find out that they needed to launch an entirely new line of business, which is dry cleaning. Right. I mean, what must that have done to these women that started this company to realize that, I mean, you know, your vision of, you know what a dry cleaner looks like and what they do and the smell. I mean,
it's definitely not high fashion.
It's not high fashion. It's like, you know, people send their clothes in and get them starched, or they send them in to get stains removed, or they send their comforter and they leave them there for like 3 months because it's not wintertime yet because they can't store it in their house. I mean, it's just a very non-glamorous, exciting line of business.
Yeah.
These women did not rent the runway to become a dry cleaner.
Yeah.
So conceptually, you know, how do you reconcile your dream with the reality of where the money's really coming from?
It's part of the humility of being an entrepreneur, because you begin to really understand the nuts and bolts of the problem. So we don't think about dry cleaning when we think about high fashion, but cleaning the clothing is an inherent part of the fashion industry.
Sure.
Like, it has to be. You just don't think about it because you don't really think about fashion from a production perspective.
And
you
not
think
at
about
that
it
scale.
Exactly.
Not at the rent the runway scale.
Exactly.
Because they had incredible success.
Mm-hmm. They had incredible success. And then it's also about, you know, understanding what your audience needs and being kind of a slave to that. Like, if your audience is telling you through their actions, this is what we need, this is something that is important to us, this is something that we use, this is how we're using your app, a la Instagram, this is how we're using your technology, you're not being a very good business owner or entrepreneur or innovator if you don't follow that. Let's continue to talk about some of the reasons why people realize that they need to pivot. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the sales. We talked about the shift in product market fit. People sometimes stop understanding their target audience because their target audience changes. For instance, if you have a product that relates towards a younger audience in 2000 is not going to want and react the same way as a younger audience in 2018. The culture for that generation shifts constantly, right? Then there is also the fact that sometimes you just lose your passion and you realize that you, as an owner operator, which most people in the entrepreneurial space are, just can't sustain the business that you created.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about losing your passion, that can happen in quite a few ways. I mean, so I was helping a small business launch their new company, and my client at the time, I helped her come up with the name of her company. She didn't have a name. I helped her come up with the visual identity. She didn't have a visual identity. You know, she's launching. I helped her come up with her brand promise statement, which is what she's promising to her intended and desired customer. Helped her design her front end of the website. Also helped design the back end of the website and produced, you know, the letterheads, business card, newsletter, social media channels, and I also helped her create her videos. So guess what happened after we were done with all that after a year?
No, I don't want to guess.
I mean, she was exhausted.
Mm-hmm. She got burned out.
She got burned out. And she was like, you know, I've been dreaming about this for so long. And now that it's here, I'm like, what? She wanted to run the opposite direction. And she was like, I got to go to take a vacation for like a year. Like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. And part of it's because when you have a dream and a vision, when you actually put it into action to make it a reality, you're like, oh my God, this is what it looks like. This is what I have to do.
It isn't glamorous.
It's not glamorous. And so, you know what? She ended up completely pivoting to a whole nother thing. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. You know, and it's still kind of out there as an element, as an element in the ethers for her to pull down when she wants it. You know, and I almost feel like she looks at it as either a cautionary tale or she looks at it as a success. I can't figure it out because it could be a cautionary tale like, I'll never do that again. Or it could be, you know, the other thing where it's a vision that she looks at and says, you know, I have that in my back pocket for whenever I need it. But I will say that the process to develop that company, that brand for her, helped her have a vision for how to do the next one and the next one and the next one, right? Mm-hmm. And so she was able to switch to other things, and she had a model for how to do it differently and how to do some things the same.
Wow.
So, you know, that's the kind of pivot that you want to avoid, but then there's still always lessons in failure. There's lessons in mistakes. It's like what Nelson Mandela says, I never lose, I win or I learn.
Wow.
That's always the truth in business. Mm-hmm. You can't look at losing as anything but learning, ever. Don't ever look at losing as anything. You have to have the courage to pivot. That's the other issue. You've got to say, I'm going to do this no matter what. And it takes a lot to make a change. And like you said a minute ago, to decide that you're not going to do that business anymore, you're going to shut it down and pivot to something else, that is some braveness. That is brave. #brave, right? Totally brave.
How do most people, or in your experience, how do people get to a place where they're finally like, okay, I'm going to do this? It sounds like those are some of the conversations that you would have with like a mentor, mm-hmm. someone who's outside the business enough to say, you're right, it is time for a change.
I've been talking a lot recently to people that are in their careers or in their spaces, and they're talking about taking a leap of faith and doing something totally different, which is completely scary to them. I think what's happening with many people now is they're getting just overwhelmed and inundated and, you know, sensory overload, and they want to make a change. And so fundamentally, the courage to pivot stems from a need that you have for something different. Now, you know, I don't know how you define that need. Some people want to make a change because what they're doing is not working. Some people, you know, there's a need because there's an opportunity and they're like, oh, wow, that's an opportunity. I'm going to go for that. That's an opportunity. Sometimes you realize that when you're inventing something, one of the things that you invented in the process of inventing and failing, the thing that failed may have failed for your original vision, but it's actually successful for something else. And you have to take that success and apply it in a totally different way, which had nothing to do with your hypothesis for what you thought you were building.
Just speaking of hypothesis, it's funny you mentioned that word, because Eric Rice, who came up with the term pivot in application to business and startups and things like that, talks about starting a business as testing a set of assumptions. Mm-hmm. Like, you have a hypothesis that there's this problem and this is the best way to fix it. As you begin to gather information, that hypothesis might have to change, aka you might have to pivot your strategy. What are 3 pieces of advice you would give to a company that is at a crossroads and thinking that it might have to pivot sometime in the very near future?
Number 1, list the consequences on paper. Open up your Google Docs and type in what's the worst that could happen. And the second thing would be, what's the best that could happen? Mm-hmm. You know, you got to have
what opportunities
you've
am I
got
going
to
to miss?
You've got to see it, the threat and opportunities.
Right.
the third thing I would suggest is when you have that listed on, your doc, you want to maybe shop it around to your most trusted community. I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about making this change. Can you help me talk me through it a little bit? Ask yourself, are you willing to give up if it totally doesn't work? That's a big deal for people. This may be a conversation with your mentor if you have one. If you're prepared for turning around, walking away, great. I've known entrepreneurs and business owners that have so much guilt and shame that they haven't been able to turn around and walk away and shut something down. And it's a monkey on their back forever, and it's still out there. And that's not a place that you really want to be, but I understand it.
How do you know if you're delusional or not?
Delusional?
Like, as an entrepreneur.
Oh,
some people are like, there's some people who are like, I'm going to be the next XYZ. And from an objective standpoint, you're like, the strategy you're going, doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Like, how do you maintain that level of self-awareness? Because entrepreneurship, like we talked about earlier with the need to be self-driven, it's almost inherently delusional.
I love it.
Like, you have to be able to say something like, I'm going to build a search engine that's going to help you find anything you want on the internet.
People thought they were crazy. You know that, right?
People think everyone is crazy
You're
that does
right.
anything that's, like Henry Ford said,
That's
if I had
never-
asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted faster horses. Very few people know what they need or want until you show them in context. That can be a very dangerous place when you're dealing with money and livelihood and business and building something where you have the pride of not wanting to quit, but then you also can have the lack of sense awareness or realistic thinking of, is this really
you brought up two people
possible?
that are not average, normal people. They're visionaries and they change the world. So, that does not necessarily, apply to like an average person that's building a cool business, right? The two visionaries that invented Google and, Henry Ford, those, come on, Esther. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying there's not gonna be another Henry Ford. That's absurd. But
okay, let's look at edible arrangements. I'm going to make you a bouquet of fruit. Like, what? But it worked. But if you said that to me before I ever saw one, I would have been like,
yes, let's look at the other examples. Okay, that's a good example. So what I think is really interesting about that is I kind of think about all the guys that are in high school right now playing basketball that think they're going to be in the NBA. Okay? They believe they're going to be Michael Jordan, or not Michael Jordan,
LeBron James.
They think they're going to be LeBron James, whatever. All the big giant stars are like, I'm going to play pro basketball for the NBA. And you're just like, good luck with that, because hardly anybody makes it to the NBA. So what do? You prepare yourself for other opportunities. What does that look like?
Right.
So you're playing basketball in high school. You understand the game. You learn about the stats. Mm-hmm. You learn about sports broadcasters. You learn about, sports doctors. You figure out people that do like statistics and analysis. You think about corporations that run, the branding for the teams. You look at people that create merchandise and television shows and comedy skits. There are other ways that you can prepare yourself in the space. And maybe you say, you know what, I'm not going to play the NBA, but I'm going to pivot because I'm actually going to be a deep analyst and work on, statistics to figure out who's going to win the game next year. You know what I mean? Or just figure out players. Yeah. So there's other ways for you to just be ready for that opportunity to pivot. But if you're so focused on one thing and you're not leaving yourself open for other possibilities, you're screwed. Really, you're screwing yourself. You really are. You're really messing up. You're messing up your ability to find success in something that you're passionate about, because there is such a thing as, part of the reason why some businesses don't want to change is they feel so much passion for it that they can't see that it's not happening. Yeah. Because they're so passionate. It just becomes like, an obsession. An unhealthy obsession. It's unhealthy. It's unhealthy in all kinds of ways around it. So, why not, come up with some other things? So I'm trying to work on a project right now with this organization called Chicago Elite Classic. And that's something between Whitney Young and Simeon. And they have like two awesome basketball teams that get together, and they basically do a small version of the NCAA championships, right, in Chicago. And they pull, teams from all over the country and blah, blah, blah. And, one of the things that, they talk about, I went to the event last year, they're trying to tell the young kids that are playing basketball, look, you're probably not going to make it to the NBA, okay? But there are so many other opportunities for you in basketball. Let's talk about the ways. And by the way, let's introduce you to 3 other basketball players that are running awesome businesses, and they're making a ton of money. For former high school basketball players that didn't go NBA, but they're killing it because you know what? They got their education, they were prepared, and they were listening, and they're still in their field. They're just not actually doing the thing that they originally thought they set out to do.
I think the word here is that they remain nimble and agile.
Yes.
Like they were ready for the pivot.
Yes.
Because sometimes you can be so stiff and stuck that you're not even ready for the pivot.
Right. There's an article in a book that Esther and I want to recommend on pivoting. And there's a great one on the Harvard Business Review. It's called The Strategic Pivot, Rules for Entrepreneurs and Other Innovators. It's a little bit of an older article, but I think it's important because it's really focused more on, Silicon Valley culture pivoting with products and inventions, turning a basic idea into some big giant thing, which is what we talked about earlier with Instagram, right? So that's a great article. Definitely do a Google search on it, and you can find out more about that. Pivoting has a lot of different definitions, and our conversation with the Honest Field Guide is really more aligned with small businesses, entrepreneurs, people that are, definitely thinking big, but are starting off very small, right? So, take a look at that article. And then Esther, what about your book that you'd like people to read?
So the book is one that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. That's Lean Startup by Eric Rice.
Yeah.
He is the person who introduced the word pivot in the lexicon of startup. So pivot, obviously he didn't invent the word pivot, but he used it to describe companies that are lean and nimble, switching the route towards their vision in response to what they've learned from the market. So like I said, creating a business is like having a hypothesis and testing a set of assumptions. And when you test those assumptions, you listen to what your market and your target audience is telling you. Sometimes that is, we don't want it, or we don't want it like this. And then you pivot in response to that. That's a really good book just to, one, learn how to be very nimble as a company, but 2, to understand what pivoting really looks like with other companies in mind.
And another book, one more thing I might say is when you're running a business, whatever that business is, you've got to read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. It is transformative, it's liberating, and it really helps you understand that a lot of what you're doing can be automated and you don't need to be doing it yourself. This episode's tip for Black women in business. Are you ready, Esther, to hear my tip?
Yes.
I'm excited about my tip.
I'm ready. I'm excited for
You're
your
ready
tip.
for the
Yep.
tip?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is a big one. This is a big deal. Black women in business. Stop today, immediately, asking all of your other Black women friends in business to do stuff for you for free. Stop. End. Fiend.
The end.
Don't do it.
Curtains.
Black women in business, we, are always in a constant struggle, right? For visibility, recognition, awareness, whatever you want to call it. We are striving and working so hard. We have families and children and communities and, boys and girls to raise, whatever. And, when we need help with something, we have to pay people to help us. One of the things that, we don't want to do, it drives me crazy, is when you ask your girl to help you out and not pay your girl. Whatever that is you're asking for, please come up with some money for that person because, she's trying to make her business work too. I have a lot of women that I hire for a lot of different jobs. And I cannot think of a time, especially, now that I know what I know as a person that's been in business 20 years, I feel shame if I go and ask another Black woman to do any work for me without paying them. I'm just not going to do it. So that's my tip. Make sure that when you ask your Black friend to help you on a project that you're doing for your company, that you say, I have a couple hours I could use your guidance and assistance on. It's for this particular thing I'm doing. What is your hourly rate? Just lead the question. What is your hourly rate? And then if she tells you and you can afford it, great. If you can't afford it, and say, wow, that's awesome. I don't know if I have that right now. So you're going to have to come up with another solution for how to get to that, to get to your answer, and that's it. Just, if you can't afford to pay your person for that, then you're not ready for, the big time, and just, either don't ask or go do it yourself. But otherwise, have your checkbook ready. And, I where I got this idea, Esther?
Where?
I have this wonderful woman I work with. Her name is Mikai Brown. She's got a company called, I think it's Mikai Brown Consulting. She's tremendous, and she leads workshops on this topic. She literally leads workshops saying, do not work for free. Do not cut your prices down. Number 3, never ask your Black friends to work for you for free. So what do you think of that tip? It's a good one, right?
I think it's great because guess what? When you need some other work done from someone who's not Black, what you're going to do, you're going to pull out your wallet.
Uh-huh.
So what do you look like? Paying someone else to do work and then expecting your homegirl to do something for free unless she owns part of the business.
Well, that's different.
That's different.
That's
but
different.
If she doesn't, you need to pay her like you pay everybody else to do everything else.
Thank you. Can we just do a high five on that?
Cough it up. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Honest Field Guide, where we discuss the art of the pivot.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, JinJa. And we'll see you next time. The Honest Field Guide podcast is produced by Birk Creative, written and created by JinJa Birkenbeuel and Esther Ikoro. The podcast is recorded in the innovation and technology capital of the Midwest, Chicago, at Stomping Ground Studios in Ukrainian Village.
Original music is written by and provided courtesy of Utah Carol. Follow Honest Field Guide on Instagram and Twitter.